Hey friend, it's me Vasco with a quick announcement. We at the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast are organizing this year's Scrum Master Summit. For tickets and details on the summit, check out the URL bit.ly/SM Summit 22. All one word, SMSUMMIT 22. And now, on to the show. Hello, everybody. Welcome to one more week of the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. And this week with us, we have a national of Portugal, where I'm from as well. So allow me to say this in Portuguese. Luís, bem-vindo.
Muito obrigado. Thank you so much, Vasco.
It's a pleasure to have another Portuguese here on the show, of course. And Luís is an enthusiast of all things related with organizations, team structures, and ways of working. He's been working in large-scale consumer products for most of his professional life, worked with people of many backgrounds, cultures, and locations, and, of course, made many friends in the process, like most of us Portuguese usually do.
Yes,
And
indeed.
he loves traveling, food, and getting to know people. Luís, that was a short intro to you. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and how did you end up becoming a Scrum Master?
Thank you, Vasco. Yeah, so I've been working in consumer products for most of my professional life, so to say, since around 2003. And it's really something that I love, all the problem solving, all the complexity of product. In particular with Scrum, this was in one of the biggest initiatives I've ever worked with. This was around 2008. And this was big scale project. And we were using Scrum. So we were introduced to Scrum. I wasn't a Scrum Master at that time. So we had Scrum Masters. And also they kind of helped us and myself included get into that new mindset, into that rhythm. I was quite interested by it. I started to look further into it. At that time, what was taught to us was not much about complex problems versus complicated problems. It was mostly still a lot about efficiency. Efficiency on scope. You only use 20% of what you build. And also in de-risking things because we're building iteratively, so we have less surprises, but that still kind of made sense to me. But I was interested in it, so I started to look around. I went to do my certification, and that was also my entry point into the community, into the big community that we have. And that kind of sparked the interest. And as I moved from that product into other products, right? So I also had my part of the responsibility was also checking kind of the governance as we do these products. It was something that made sense. So we basically kind of reused it as we went along in building other products. So that was a bit how I got into Agile and particularly into Scrum.
It's interesting that you talk about the early days. I mean, 2008 is only 7-8 years after Scrum started to take hold of the software industry. It's interesting how you talk about, in those times, we talked about efficiency more than anything else. And I'm sure the contrast will become clear as we go through this week and we talk about the different topics. But now let's talk about a story of failure, Luís. We talk about failure as somebody once described here on the podcast. Fail means first attempt in learning, which is, I think, a great acronym to use. We talk about failure because, of course, we want to focus on the learnings. But before we dive into the learnings and the conclusions and how that story made you a different person, Luís, tell us first that story where you, as a Scrum Master, you tried your best, but at that time, that just wasn't good enough. Tell us that story.
Yeah, so I was working in also a big initiative. When we had already a product line in there, but we were spinning off kind of the new version, the 2.0 of that product. And I was working with a team. So it was a new team, so new among themselves. And also, a bit of low maturity level between themselves and also as a team. There was at that time also not a lot of time pressure on them. So we just started to wrap it slow. But we started to realize that we were having a lot of problems. So sprint goals were not met. We had quality issues, and they kind of piled up sprint over sprint, sprint over sprint, sprint over sprint. We initially downplayed it, like, okay, it's just something that went wrong. It's a hiccup. It's part of getting the team forming. but things were really, really piling up. This was also not visible, so we were using Scrum and we were doing iterative, so we should have picked up these things earlier, right? Because we should have had better feedback loops, but that was also not the case. So for example, our daily didn't really reflect the problems that we were having, and was always like a big surprise at the end as we were going closer to our review that things were not working, or we were testing things, we were figuring out that things were not working very, very close to the end of the sprint.
Well, why do you think that was? Like, if you think about the daily as a collaboration point, right? Like where all the problems should come up because we want to tackle them immediately. Why was it that in that team, like what was the underlying anti-pattern there that did not allow them to share the problems in the daily stand-up?
Yeah, so I think there was two. So I think one was the level of maturity. They were still used to doing a big chunk of code, so to say, and then in the end, just ship it and test it. And I think the other one was a bit psychological safety. So they didn't really feel safe to say, this is not going well, or I'm not going to make it.
Now, of course, those two are obvious lack of maturity problems, right? Like the lack of psychological safety is not necessarily a lack of maturity, but the inability to talk about it, to bring it up, is definitely a lack of maturity. Working on too large chunks of functionality and trying to deliver everything in the last day is another symptom of lack of maturity, at least as an agile team, not necessarily as a waterfall team, but definitely as an agile team. But one thing that is in my mind as a question is, what drove the team to those anti-patterns? Like, let's start with the big chunks of functionality. Like, is that what they did before and nobody told them that the world could be different? Like, why were they working that way?
So I think, yeah, so I think it was some old habits, so to say, from waterfall ways of working, where they just saw, for example, these sprints as like mini waterfalls sometimes. I think there was also a lot of overcommitment. So they were not used to doing this sizing or in this format. And when they figured out that they overcommitted, they didn't want to kind of lose face to say, look, I've made a mistake. And they kind of felt that they it was their job to deliver kind of no matter what. But okay, I mean, miracles don't exist, and you don't do work just because someone says that you do. So it either fits or it doesn't. So I think it was a bit of that, and also something in regards to the relationship of the team within the organization. So they were part of a different reporting line within the organization, and they had a dotted line to the project. Also, what happened, and this is a bit outside of the team, but I think it affected them, was that whenever we reported problems, whenever we reported that we were late, I mean, we weren't finger pointing, we weren't blaming, but this was seen as an escalation because they were a different unit. And I remember also, I don't know, a bit of their culture, and again, the lack of psychological safety, that they were actually getting instructions by their line management on things that weren't really helping us. So when we addressed this way, I had to work with both our product leadership and their line management to try to figure out a solution, right? So basically the team needed a bit of help. Also in regards to the quality of code, it wasn't well. I ended up being able to negotiate that we did 3 months of refactoring, no new functionality, which was quite a feat to get that ahead. But actually it was due to kind of a one-on-one that I had with one of the developers, where it slipped that they were getting instructions, for example, from their leadership to do things like, okay, don't do short-lived branches and things like that. Okay, good practice of engineering, but they weren't really solving our problem. And besides that, their leadership was being defensive because they were treating this as an escalation, while all that we were doing was being transparent, right? We're not shipping work. You really can't hide that. And opening this up so that we could find a solution. So that was tough time. I at some point I didn't know what to do, how to maneuver. I remember also having a very heated discussion with their director, because again, for him it was a confrontation, and I was trying to just solve a problem, so to say. And we ended up hiring some additional people, kind of just to help them restructure their work in terms of ways of working, also in terms of architecture. And again, I got those 3 months just to refactor the code. And from that point onwards, things started to go smoother. But getting to that particular point was very, very difficult. And if I hadn't had that one-to-one with this developer, because they were not allowed to tell us, look, we're also getting these directives. If I didn't get to this one-to-one, I probably could not have picked up the bigger picture.
And I think that really the term bigger picture here applies very well, right? Because what started off as you started telling the story, what started off as potentially a lack of maturity actually revealed itself to be a systemic topic, right? It was about the stakeholders, their expectations, how that was causing the reactions in the team itself, like the lack of psychological safety had to come from somewhere, right? And I think that really highlights one of the key aspects of being a Scrum Master is that we're never really only working with the team, even though that's our main focus, even though that's where we spend most of the time, even though at some points we may even, work very, very focused on the team, we still need to have a pretty good picture of what's going on around, like what are the expectations and the conversations that are happening, sometimes without us being present, right?
Sometimes hidden from us, but you need to try to
dig it out.
Yes,
literally.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. That was a great story and a great reminder. Thank you for sharing that, Luis.
Thank you.
Hey friends, it's Vasco again, now with a bit longer announcement. I'm part of the team that is behind the Global Scrum Master Summit, the conference dedicated to the Scrum Master role. If you're a Scrum Master, the Scrum Master Summit is the place to learn, to share, and of course to meet new friends. We will have lots of live sessions where you can meet and network with other Scrum Masters from the whole globe. So make sure you check it at bit.ly/SM Summit 22. We have several amazing keynotes and 7 tracks that feature people like you and of course thought leaders sharing their insights, their knowledge, and helping you become an awesome Scrum Master. You can check out all of the details of the summit, including the keynotes announced, the track chairs, and much more at bit.ly/SM Summit 22. That's all one word. That's bit.ly/SM SUMMIT and the numeral 22. I'll see you on the conference floor.